World bosses are one of the most popular aspects of Guild Wars 2, massive enemies that require a ton of players to work together in order to take them down. And today, I want to go over the 10 best world bosses across the entirety of Guild Wars 2. This is another one of those two-part top 10 lists, because I'm going to be going over the top 10 meta events in a future week, and the difference between the two can be a bit vague, but let's get started. In the number 10 spot is the Fire Elemental. This is a pretty fun and interesting boss fight that just has a lot of history and has become more popular recently, where you fight this boss in the Thaumanova reactor in the Megadestroyer province. Because it is in the Megadestroyer province, this is a pretty low level boss that a lot of players will have done because it's one of the first big events in the game. The story going on here in about a 2-sentence summary is that the Thaumanova reactor is an Inquest experiment that exploded, unleashing a ton of chaos magic, and the explosion toward the fabric of reality in this area, where there is a lot of stuff going on in this area, but one Asuran crew is trying to clean up this mess, but the chaotic energy fused with the cleaning golem's core and created this massive fire elemental. Back in the day, this was a joke of a fight. There is this cool spot up here that everyone used to sit on and just shoot the fire elemental for a few seconds and then kill him. And I actually kind of like this because you have to do a slight skill jump to get up here, but nowadays we have mounts. Yet some players may remember that this boss was insanely difficult when the game first released, and it got balanced in November of 2012 to the state of it being a joke, until July of 2022, where this boss, alongside a few others, got updated again, and it actually became a pretty fun fight where you have to move around a bit and you fight the boss for longer than 10 seconds. Additionally, there is a bonus boss after this fight where a player has to do a bit of an adventure in order to get a key to unlock this boss, which is just a nice cherry on top. In the number 9 spot is the Claw of Jormag. This is one of the original bosses that I think is just so iconic. When I think of Guild Wars 2 world bosses, this is one of the first ones that come to mind, and I have so much nostalgia related to this boss. This is one of the main world bosses that was highlighted prior to the release of Guild Wars 2 and was shared around a lot with the release of the game, where you fight one of Jormag's lieutenants in a pretty decent epic battle in the Frostgorge Sound, where you work alongside the Pact. Unfortunately, this fight is actually kind of boring, where over the years it has become faster and faster to defeat because of power creep, and you mostly just stand in 2, technically 3 different places and DPS the boss down, where when we look at the event as a whole, it has a pretty good foundation. The Pact assault on this dragon is indeed pretty epic, it just doesn't work out too well in the modern age, where I think this boss is generally the most requested candidate for a massive update to the boss and its mechanics, where we have seen world bosses updated to great success, like with the fire elemental we just talked about, as well as multiple other bosses we are about to talk about, where I am personally super excited about this boss potentially being updated, even if it's nowhere on the horizon right now. But despite how underwhelming it can be in the modern day, it is just a super nostalgic fight for me, and probably one of the most important bosses in the game when it comes to early marketing. In the number 8 spot is the Karka Queen. This is the first world boss to be added to the game after the initial release of Guild Wars 2, as she was introduced to the game in the Last Stand at South Sun release in May of 2013. The story going on here is actually kind of interesting, where to give a quick summary, Canuck, who is the people's champion and hates the consortium, orchestrated the Karka to attack various settlements around South Sun Cove via some sort of toxin, where you have to go and defeat the different settlements, which drives out the Karka Queen, who you then fight. Where the fight itself is pretty fun. Back in the day, it was pretty unique and interesting, as the Karka were a new race that we were interacting with and were cool from an aesthetics point of view, but nowadays we have fought a ton of Karka throughout the game, so this boss isn't as special anymore, but still fun. But I am someone who loves South Sun Cove and the Karka a lot, so on one hand, having a pretty cool fight with a pretty cool boss is just overall a good experience, but on the other hand, this is one of the primary reasons why people still come to South Sun Cove, and it's probably the only reason for many players. So to that end, I appreciate this boss for making an old and small map remain relevant for all these years. But this is also one of the first times where players are leaving the original maps of Guild Wars 2, as South Sun Cove is the first post-release map, which I think is just a cool experience. And finally, killing this boss rewards one of the first titles that many new players get, called Killer Queen, and I always appreciate seeing all these new players running around the world repping this title. In the number 7 spot is Dragonstorm. This is one of those bosses that could be on this list or on the upcoming meta events list, but it seems like mechanically and by most people it is considered a world boss, where this is the final fight of the Icebreed Saga and it is pretty cool, but it has quite a bit of baggage, where the Icebreed Saga was a really fun season with excellent maps and stories, but it got cut in half where the rest of the story was condensed down into multiple ill-received releases that all culminated with this world boss, where when we ignore the state of these releases and how the story did not get what it deserved, this boss fight is incredible, where you're fighting both Primordus and Jormag at the same time, which is a story beat that has been hinted at for a very long time now, and we finally get to experience it, where the fight itself mostly takes place between each Elder Dragon's champion, where you have to fight them, fight a bunch of other minions, and take a few jabs at the Elder Dragons themselves. Where the majority of what is going on here is how you are instigating the two Elder Dragons to destroy each other, because that is the other way for them to be defeated. Whereas you get to the end, you get a very, very cool cutscene. And a lot of people have different opinions about this fight because of the releases that it came out in and how a lot of people have done this world boss a lot over the last few years, but on all, it's just a pretty epic and fun fight. In the number 6 spot is the Shadow Behemoth. This is another world boss that released with Guild Wars 2 in 2012 and is another world boss located in a starting zone, but this time in Queensdale, where for many of the same reasons as the Fire Elemental, a ton of players have fought this world boss before, but a lot more players have a ton of nostalgia when it comes to fighting this boss because it is located in Queensdale, the human starting zone, and is also, in my opinion, a fair bit cooler than the Fire Elemental, where you have this massive nightmare creature that is trying to break free from the underworld and into Tyria, where you have to fight him back. Where this boss takes place in God's Lost Swamp, which houses the Temple of the Ages, an incredibly important lore location. Where this fight has always been pretty cool, but just like the Fire Elemental, it got updated in 2022 with new mechanics, and it is a ton better than what it used to be. Where aesthetically, the fight stays the same, but it has become a lot more engaging and has better flow to the fight that meets the modern standards of Guild Wars 2, and overall it is just an all-around good boss with incredible vibes. In the number 5 spot is the Shatterer. This is a world boss that takes in a lot of different factors from bosses we have already talked about. First off, just like the Claw of Jormag, this is one of the most important bosses in the game when it comes to pre-release and early post-release footage and marketing for the game. This is one of the biggest parts of Guild Wars 2 that was showcased and really brought a lot of players into the game. Alongside that, the boss fight is pretty cool, where you have a massive battle between players and a dragon, where you can have some players on siege equipment shooting the dragon and other brand minions, and there's a lot of stuff going on here with healing crystals, break bars, and more mechanics. Back in the day, this boss suffered from being super easy, just like the Fire Elemental. There was a single spot that players could stand to just DPS the boss down quickly and safely, but in January of 2016, the boss was redesigned and a bunch of new mechanics were added to make the fight a lot more engaging, where I think the boss is a lot of fun and this update was incredible. Unfortunately, with the existence of power creep over the years, we're pretty close to that pre-2016 experience, where if players don't kill the boss before he does any mechanics, players will typically kill him after one round of mechanics. But overall, this fight is really, really cool and I love it a lot. And it's probably one of the most important pieces of content in the entirety of Guild Wars 2. And the number 4 spot is the Jungle Wurm. This is a road boss that is just so incredibly nostalgic for me that it wormed its way this high on my list. Just like with the Fire Elemental and Shadow Behemoth, this is a road boss located in a starting zone that most players should have done, and just like those two bosses again, this is another road boss that was updated in 2022. Where the Jungle Wurm is located in Caledon Forest, which is one of my favorite zones in all of Guild Wars 2. I am a big Svanir lover, so just everything related to the Svanir would naturally be one of my favorite things in the game, and this is like the Svanir world boss. The updated version of this boss is pretty good, and it's an all-around enjoyable fight. Even before the update, this boss was probably one of the best basic road bosses in the game, and it was quite a bit of fun. The area that you fight the Jungle Wurm in is incredible. The stone heads are one of my favorite decorations in all Guild Wars 2, and they look so cool. The story going on here with cleansing the corruption is also pretty great. I love the vicinity to the Twilight Arbor dungeon, and it is just overall a pretty great fight and boss. In the number 3 spot is Drakkar. This is another world boss released during the Iceroot Saga as a part of the Shadow in the Ice release, where this boss has a ton of story related to it, going all the way back to the original Guild Wars, where Drakkar corrupted the Norn Svanir who became the Nornbear, with all the events surrounding that character that eventually inspired the cult of the Sons of Svanir that we see in Guild Wars 2 today. So being able to combat this creature in our campaign against Jormag was perfect, and the vibes of this boss and how it fit into the vibes of the release were also great. They were going for kind of an eldritch horror vibe, and they did pretty well across the release. The way that Drakkar slithers through the ice and bursts out at you while Jormag is trying to manipulate you is just great, and the boss fight itself is also pretty good. It is a relatively new boss fight compared to the ones I released in 2012, and it is a lot of fun. I definitely enjoy coming through here and fighting the bosses every now and then, and I also loved getting all of the achievements back when the boss originally released. I like all of the different phases and how we go to special arenas to fight 3 different mini-bosses throughout the fight. And just all in all, Drakkar is a pretty solid world boss and is one of my favorites in the game. In the number 2 spot is Tequatl the Sunless. This is an interesting boss for me to put on this list because I am actually not a super big fan of this fight. Overall, I think it's pretty decent. I really like how Tequatl destroys a tower at the start of the fight. Fighting back towards a Risen is great, and the Mega Laser shooting Tequatl down is always fun, but the strengths of this fight is also its weakness. When we look at the entirety of Guild Wars 2, this is the single most popular world boss in the entire game, hands down. Tequatl spawns at reset every single day, and it is probably the most played event in the game each day. A lot, and I mean a lot of people do this world boss every day, and for good reason. It's a fun fight that is super rewarding. But because of that, I think this boss has kind of gotten a bit stale, for me at least. Where I've done this boss so many times in my life that I don't really do it often anymore because the thought of fighting him is kind of off-putting at times. But in a way, that's a good thing. It really is a testament to this boss that I have done it so many times over the years, and I do still do it every now and then, and it is still a pretty good boss fight. This is another boss that got overhauled and is actually one of the, if not the first world boss to get a major overhaul in Guild Wars 2. It kind of depends on what your criteria for that is. Where way back in the day, the fight was very easy and you kind of just DPS'd it down, but with the overhaul there are a ton of phases and mechanics you have to do, even if it is kind of just DPSing the boss down nowadays. And while I am a bit tired of this boss, it is still a fantastic boss and is incredibly rewarding, and the cultural impact that it has had on the game and the community easily puts it this high up on the list. And now for the number 1 spot, for my favorite road boss in the entire game, and it has to go to Triple Trouble. There is no debate for me. This is easily my favorite road boss in all of Guild Wars 2, where Triple Trouble originally released during Living Road Season 1 in a double update that released both this boss and also the Twisted Marionette, which is another fantastic boss that I love a lot, but I don't think it has aged very well. But it did make my honorable mentions list. In Bloodtide Coast, you can work alongside the Vigil who sends out 3 soldiers to investigate 3 different spots where there have been disturbances, where they force 3 jungle worm heads out of the ground that the entire map has to split up into 3 groups in order to fight, and each one is incredibly unique. The Amber Worm is above and beyond my favorite, where you have to get eaten alive by the jungle worm, grab a spear gun, shoot your way out of the belly of the worm, and then shoot the worm with the spear gun. But the Cobalt Worm is also fun, where you have to gather kegs, some of which require you to do a small jumping puzzle to get in order to bomb the worm. And the Crimson Worm is pretty fun in its own right, where you have to collect different phytotoxins, but it's definitely a bit more boring, yet more straightforward for newer players. Where I think the biggest aspect of this fight that I love are the mechanics and the vibes. Where fighting these 3 jungle worms is a ton of fun gameplay wise, and the atmosphere and aesthetics of this fight are great, especially the Amber Worm with how you're eaten alive by the worm. But alongside all of that, this is a pretty important boss when it comes to the culture of the game, where this is still a pretty decently challenging boss, but it's pretty much a guaranteed kill in the post-reset group each day. But back when the boss originally released, it was incredibly challenging, where communities on servers, back when servers were imported in PvE, came together to try to beat this boss for the first time ever, where when a server got rolled first, the leader gave a pretty impressive speech that was memorialized on this plaque here, link down in the comments.
This day we came together, this day, friends, family, players of all kinds from all over this wonderful world of ours. We came together and we defeated this one that had tormented us for so long. Triple Trouble, more like no more, no more!
And that's my list. I hope you enjoyed. Road bosses are an iconic part of Guild Wars 2 and are one of my favorite activities in the game. I'll be taking a look at different meta events in the future as well, but if you have any thoughts about road bosses I talked about, have on the honorable mentions list, or did not mention at all, feel free to leave those thoughts down in the comments. I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves. Have a good one, everyone.